I'm Rosie Mendoza.
I'm Megan Burr.
I'm Ben Stanford.
I'm Lauren Russell.
And I'm Michaela Snyder. And our presentation is on to what extent does race play in today's American justice system?
The definition of racism is discriminating against people of a certain race and determining them as either inferior or superior to other races.
There is a large disproportion in the incarceration rates based on race. Even though the majority of the United States is white, there is an overwhelming concentration of African Americans currently in the prison system today. America was supposedly founded on the ideals of life, liberty, and equality. However, these ideals are not being portrayed in the American justice system today. The obvious disparities we can see were formed over half a millennium of inherent racism in American history, with the first colonies in America in the year 1492. The first race-based slaves were transported to America through the harsh Middle Passage during the 16th century. Slaves were the main source of labor for plantations and were treated as property rather than humans. Social researcher Bannister explains how some believed that this way of reasoning was justified during this time, due to a belief known today as social Darwinism, which is the idea that Africans were in the position of slaves because they were inherently inferior. This way of thinking has led America's criminal justice system to continue to discriminate on the basis of race. Moving down further in history, a set of oppressive and racist laws emerged. These are known as Jim Crow laws. These laws prohibited people of different races to marry each other, use the same water fountain, or even express their opinions if they wanted racial equality. We can still see these types of laws in America's justice system by defining a person in the system by the pigment of their skin. In the United States Constitution, we have guaranteed notions of liberty for all of its citizens. However, in the making of our country, only 3 white men were even considered as citizens. Dr. Jones of the Hampton Institute reiterates the fact that even the U.S. Constitution once considered African Americans only 3/5 of a person. The criminal justice system has been used by a means to perpetuate racial inequality since its inception. The way that America was founded upon is one of the reasons for these disparities in the criminal justice system. The history of racism in the justice system contributes to the issue today. Ethics also play a large role in the justice system.
Ethics lay the foundation of the justice system. It is what helped us develop the ethical reasoning that we use to this day, and how we look and define criminal activities, and what we as a society think should be an acceptable punishment and if it fits the crime committed. We have witnessed abuse of ethics a lot this past year alone. One example of this would be the Brock Turner case versus the Corey Beatty case. It is a good example because Brock Turner, a 21-year-old white male, was proven guilty of raping an unconscious woman, and he only received 3 months in prison, while Corey Beatty was sentenced to 15 years of the exact same crime. Corey Beatty is an African-American male who was convicted of the same time as a white male, but yet their prison times are polar opposites. Not only is racism seen in our courts, but it is also being shown in our police departments all over the U.S. 74% of the 404 people shot by the Chicago police alone between 2008 and 2015 were black. The social bias that is being shown and proven over and over again by our court systems and by our police departments is affecting the way a whole community is viewing people of color. We cannot stand by anymore and watch people abuse ethics and their power.
In a video interview for the documentary The 13th by Ava DuVernay, the U.S. Senator from the state of New Jersey, Cory Booker, said, "We are a nation that professes freedom, yet we have this hyper-incarceration system that is exploiting the most vulnerable citizens and is overwhelmingly biased towards people of color." The hyper-incarceration that Cory Booker was talking about is a process that imprisons large amounts of people. This affects our economy in 2 ways. The first way is the prison industrial complex. It's a system that allows corporations to profit from the continuous increase in the prison population. For example, Corizon. It's a company that's a major healthcare provider for prisons in our nation. It has a multi-million-dollar contract with the prison industrial complex. Another example is Securus Technologies. It's a phone provider, and it provides walkie-talkies for security guards in some of the prisons. They have a $14 million contract with the prison industrial complex. The second part is the prison labor. So prison labor is inmates being used to produce commodities that our nation either uses or sells and exports overseas. This relates to or how this is bad is it relates to the overseas sweatshops in countries like China and Korea that pay very low wages for very hard physical labor. Considering blacks make up 40% of the prison population, this substantially correlates to the indentured servitude era following 1865 and the abolishment of slavery, kind of like Lauren talked about.
Today's American court systems are riddled with racial bias. This is an injustice because it's affecting people's outcomes, like Corey Beatty and Brock Turner, as Michaela said. Another example of this is an African-American man named Duane Buck, who was convicted of murder in a Texas court. Now, I'm not saying that that's not a bad thing to do, that's terrible, but he was sentenced to the death penalty for the sole reason that because he's African-American, he will be dangerous in the future. So instead of spending a lifetime in prison, he was given the death penalty. The racism in our justice system is affecting cultures and having them shape in different ways. The NFL, for example, is having players take a knee during the national anthem to raise awareness and protest the racial bias. The citizens of Chicago are outraged and downright scared because of the police brutality that's taking place. These are just a few examples of how our cultures are being shaped because of the racial bias, and it shows the extent of how bad the racism has become and how badly it needs to be changed.
If we don't change our criminal justice system, our problems will get worse. According to mappingpoliceviolence.org, police killed at least 102 unarmed black men in 2015, which was nearly twice each week. This number should be very alarming since these statistics are only from last year. And if we continue, this all depicts a very harsh future. This future would consist of racial profiling by police or racial bias in the justice system, like previously said. Also, riots that occur after police violence happen would continue to damage businesses in cities. Cities would continue to pay over and over again for costly changes caused by these riots, which would create an even more unsafe environment for everyone as a whole. If these problems were to be fixed, it would create a far better future that would consist of whites and people of color being treated more fairly in the justice system and more equally in society in general. These changes don't mean that we can change people's stigmas of justifying deaths or blaming the victims, nor would it completely obliterate racism in the U.S. But people of color in the U.S. would feel more secure, and the U.S. would fully grasp its founding ideals of liberty and equality. Okay. As the Washington Post states on fixing our justice system, more can be done to repair relations between police and communities of color. We should require officers to wear body cameras and defund police departments that use excessive force and racial profiling. I strongly agree with these ideas. We also should change police training when cops first begin learning, or acknowledge when someone is of a big racist background, like say an ex-KKK member, since that alone should be a clear indication of where their morals lie. These would all be good ways to fix our system. We, as well, should bring awareness to the need of racial inequality in the justice system. Though it may seem like a small step, just talking about the role race plays in the justice system or in everyday life in general helps to expose people to acknowledge the problems we are dealing with today. Also, peacefully protesting and not rioting helps more in raising awareness about these issues.
Lastly, we need to unite our country to make us stronger as a whole. And by this, we mean ending racism, so stopping racial profiling. And it all starts with our generation and the generations that we bring up after us.
I will start with Ben. Ben, what is a way in which your team's resolution makes you think differently about your own individual research?
As a team, I don't think it makes how my standpoint on my original report, I don't think our resolution as a team makes mine any different, but I think it makes it stronger. It makes my support for claim stronger because I know that like my team's individual reports really brought it together. It all connected, so it helped my confidence in my claim stronger.
Lauren, describe an argument from one of your peers' individual reports that made you think differently about your team's solution or conclusion.
So my report that I mainly focused on, it was about the history of it, and this connected to other people's reports as well, such as Ben's economic report that he drew up. That made me think differently. I realized that the socioeconomic status of people also related to the final conclusion that we had.
Thank you. Michaela, how did the group decide to include Megan's perspective or lens or conclusions into the overall presentation?
Well, her view was social and cultural. So like her view was a very like important view to our case, especially because for racial, it's like kind of like where like there's groups and places that are like stigmas now of like bad places to live. Like Chicago is supposed to be like a big racial place, like it's a big stigma there. So like her lens would like drew in a big conclusion for us that like there's certain places that we can target first and that we can like bring awareness to and not just have just like other places spread out.
Rosie, in the future, what change would you make to your group norms, and how would you expect that to improve the team presentation?
I think our group norms are pretty good, but I think more listening and just like being open to what others have to say is good. Yeah.
Could you provide an example of perhaps a time that someone didn't listen?
Oh no, well it was
Not to like well tell all your teammates, but maybe back that up.
Megan and I disagreed with something Michaela was saying because she was going into our counter argument more than like talking about our whole topic as a whole. So we were kind of like fighting about that, and like, but we weren't like angry at each other. We were just like, we were trying to peacefully like sort it out, but like, and then Ben and Lauren came in and they were all confused and yeah.
So yeah,
But
good.
we got it
We're
worked out.
listening.
We worked it out.
Okay. And Megan, having finished your project, what, if anything, do you consider to be a gap in your team's research that, if addressed, would make you feel more confident about your conclusion?
A gap in our team's research would probably be more towards what specific solutions are already being taken, specifically like what police departments are already doing to rid the racism that's spreading throughout, or the courts that are taking initiative to remove certain racially biased judges and such.